A political prediction I've made over a year ago was that the northeastern United States, which I would define as DC and up, is going to be the next Appalachia. Now, what I mean when I say that is Appalachia is a cultural region within the United States that was settled by Scots-Irish immigrants from the northern parts of England, southern parts of lowland Scotland, and parts of Northern Ireland. And they were sent to America to settle at the time it was very rural parts of America. Like they were kind of the frontiersmen. They were kind of seen as like the people you put in to areas that had dangerous native tribes because they themselves were used to violence. These people were from the most violent parts of the United Kingdom. At the time, the most crime-ridden, kind of masculine parts, very clannish, very your family did X, so my family's gonna do Y kind of thing. So this part of America used to be a somewhat major cultural region, nowhere near as big as the northeastern United States, but comparative in a lot of ways. What ended up turning this part of the United States more so to a legacy region was that due to a lack of economic diversity, downturns in the general economies, inability to recover, and over reliance, sadly, in the coal industry, especially for some states like West Virginia, it ended up becoming a lot of Appalachia ended up becoming horrifically underpopulated, which led to some of the worst poverty in American history, which itself made less people want to move there, less people want to invest, and it became this rapid cycle of no one wants to invest, no one wants to grow the economy. The economy can't grow, people can't afford to have kids, people aren't having kids, the population's stagnant or shrinking, meaning the economy by nature is going to get smaller because you have less people to sell to, because the thing that makes the American economy very strong on a global level is that it's this biggest buyer, right? America is the largest developed country on this planet. It literally has the largest pool of middle class people who are willing to spend money on foreign goods. That is a huge strength of the American economy. Granted, during the 45th president's uh, regime, during his 4 years in office, technically that did inverse before the hysteria chili, right? It did inverse a little for a while. But for the most part, America is an import economy, not an export economy, though the margins aren't horrific. But why does that affect the Northeast then? Well, if you look at all the states I listed, Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, and District of Columbia, all of these states, the biggest industry in all these states is real estate, rental, and leasing, right? It's like letting people rent office buildings. It's letting people rent from a landlord. It's letting people have live in their little dinky, slave apartments. These cuck apartments in New York, they're just like horrific that people make constant memes about. And in the states where real estate and leasing and renting aren't the biggest industries, it's stuff that it's easily doable online, like finance and insurance and in Connecticut and Delaware, or professional scientific and technical research or services in Massachusetts, and federal government jobs in DC for obvious reasons. But a lot of these jobs are crazy easy to do from home on your computer. In fact, it would be more efficient. So, a lot of the jobs in this region of the United States are simply reliant on the fact that there's a lot of people living in these states, right? That's the first flaw. Like, the main advantage you have is there's just a lot of people where you are. All right, that's a huge flaw. That is a huge flaw, and you're about to see why. Uh, the second flaw is that a lot of these jobs are easily automatable, debatably, but I'm not gonna go on touch on that too much. But more importantly, they're easily offshored. You can easily offshore them to some part of Asia. Grant, a lot of these jobs, it would probably be illegal to do that, especially insurance related information. And I know for a fact some of that cybersecurity positions are definitely, you have to definitely hire American citizens for a lot of positions in cybersecurity, and they have to be in America a lot of the time. Next, and the next big flaw is that all these states have very high medium averages for age. I mean, very high. In fact, in New England alone, almost every state in New England, with the exception of being New Hampshire, or not New Hampshire, Massachusetts, is in the top 10 of oldest average living states, and New Jersey isn't even on that list, surprisingly, which makes sense once I saw like how the age was distributed throughout my state. So a lot of these states have very old average living populations. A lot of them are going to retire and possibly move to states where it's cheaper to live. A lot of these states don't exactly have, they have a lot of immigrants sometimes coming in, but if immigration slows down, it's going to be disproportionately bigger states or states that are easier to immigrate to. And immigration is currently slowing down in the United States. Last time I checked, I could be wrong on that, so I'm not going to make that part of my argument. So these states are wealthy in the United States because they can just sell a lot of things to a lot of people, and they just have these pools of people they can just rely on. They have these economic fodder. Well, what happens if that goes away? What happens when the birth rates stop, which they have been for a while? The median age in your state is approaching 50. Right, old people spend less. They tend to be more conscientious with their money. They tend to save more, spend less. They tend to already have the house. They already tend to spend the money they would have spent on their kids. Once their kids leave the home, they leave the home. They tend to be in a place of security where they don't really feel a need to splurge, especially once people retire. Right, once like retirement comes, like the amount of money someone spends just trickles down into the last few weeks of their life, which is not what you want to rely on. You want to rely on for money. So what do a lot of these states have? Well, they have let's count the flaws of each one of these states. They all have industries that are incredibly reliant on, let's just say it, flimsy kind of like economic industries that aren't really that reliable. Like they're reliant on having a large population and maintaining it. They have very old average populations, right? According to the U-Haul index, which is an index showing what states people move out of and what states people move into, New York is 46, meaning in the United States, when people have to change what state they live in and move to a different state, by and large, they don't choose New York. In fact, there's only 4 states that do worse than New York, right? Which is very scary, right? There's only 4 states that do worse. So a lot of these states, they're very unappealing for a lot of Americans. A lot of Americans just choose not to, if they can help it, they go out of their way not to move to these states, right? And they don't move there at large numbers. They all have very low birth rates, even compared to other more red states in the United States. I'll just post this. It doesn't correlate as well as the other stats I've had. They all have very old average populations. Their industries are easily if not offshore, they can just give it to someone else in a different state for less money a lot of times. All these states have relatively high costs of living, meaning there's not really a financial reason why you would want to move here outside of high wages. And if a lot of the wages in these states are just stuff you can do online, you see why I think this part of America is just going to crush. It's just going to economically die the same way Appalachia did. Granted, some states a lot better than others. I can see the greater Boston area doing okay, since Boston and New York actually do have a fair bit of cultural hegemony. They do have a lot of cultural, like strong local culture. Meanwhile, states like New Jersey, which rank bottom in national pride, tend to have, I'm just going to say as someone who lives here, none. The South Jersey is the suburbs of Philadelphia. North Jersey is just the suburbs of New York. There's a small buffer zone between these two states of people with boats, really, but by and large, that is sadly just representative of the United States, or of New Jersey. It doesn't really have a strong local culture, sadly. I would argue states like Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and even Maryland, and debatably District of Columbia, will have to redraw their maps in the future just to make sense of political divides within their states, cultural divides, cultural hegemony, like just fit the spirit of the area these people live in a lot better. A lot of these states don't really have, they're made fun of a lot of time for being kind of unpleasant places to live, especially New York. So by and large, I think the northeastern United States, again, the District of Columbia up, is going to have a huge population tank. A lot of people only live here because there's high wages, right? People make fun of how bad it is to live in. It's expensive. The jobs are easily offshoreable, or if not offshore to a different country, you can offshore to someone else living in a different state. They all have a lot of old people on average in a country where the population is, how the whole world is aging outside like countries that are not even developing. And these states are just not like they're not appealing. No one wants to move here. People are moving out. In fact, people like around for a little bit around the hysteria chili, there was 9,000 people a day leaving New York, right? Philadelphia is constantly made fun of. So is Baltimore. These states have, I recently drove down to a trip down to DC and even to interior Virginia, and I have to say, like, a lot of these states are also just not very pretty to look at on a highway. Like there was some exceptional spots I'll admit in Maryland, but for the most part, driving around DC, Baltimore, Northern Virginia, and like through Delaware, Pennsylvania, like all these states, it's just you keep seeing over and over again that these states are just not very nice places. They're just kind of dirty and grimy, and I get why a lot of people, move out and don't look back. And I do see a lot of these states. I think the states are going to be hit the hardest are going to be Maryland. I think any major are going to be states like Maryland and the top three New England states. The top three New England states, just because they're literally all in the top like 10, and like Maine is actually the oldest average living state on average. But I mean, all these states are in the top 10 for average oldest living residents. They all have economies reliant on real estate, rental, and leasing. They all have uh, population insecurity and a lot of very old people. Old people tend to be a net negative on the economy, not a net plus, and they all have small populations like West Virginia. So it's not like I think those states are going to be very, and they're all expensive too. It's going to be a very ugly picture in the future for those states in particular. Maryland, I say so because a big reason why a lot of these states again are even wealthy in the first place is because historically you had to be close to the capital to work for a firm that was outside or a nonprofit that was based out of DC. You had to be at least driving distance. The same thing was true if you wanted to work near New York City, or Philadelphia. But now that you can work from home and that a lot of these industries are changing very rapidly, I think a lot of these states are going to have incredible population decreases. They're going to have incredible turmoil, and they're going to have poverty rates skyrocket. They're going to take aging the worst. They're not going to age gracefully, and they're going to become the next cultural Appalachia. A region famous for Stephen King and H.P. Lovecraft and some other horror adjacent-ish content. It kind of like has a legacy cultural area of the United States, but for major population hubs, I think that's going to go down to, I think the Sun Belt is going to be the next population center of the United States. I think the historical paradigm of West Coast, East Coast is going to disappear, because outside of New York City and Boston, which both have very strong cultural regional areas, they both have a lot of historical, a lot of like wealth that build up their areas to the point that maybe not impossible to fail, but they can only, they'll only fail for so long until like reality comes back. They'll never like throw away all their potential. But yeah, a lot of these states, like I'm calling it, especially the top three New England states, just due to age and the fact a lot of these states are reliant on real estate and industries that are easily offshoreable or easily done online. I do not see these states being nice places to live. I think a lot of these states are going to become copies of the poorest states in the country from a few years ago. If you enjoyed my commentary, like, comment, and subscribe.